Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm sitting here in my greenhouse, and right now as I'm shooting this, it's actually June 29th, 2023. And by the time you're seeing this, it's going to be later in August. And by then, these tomato plants will be way up over my head. I'm actually sitting on a 5-gallon bucket right now. And I just wanted to share with you all how I raise my tomatoes. It's going to be a little different than what other people do. But I like to put this kind of information out because what some people do and people put out, say, this is the way you should do it and so on and so forth. And that's great because that is what they should do, especially considering their climate, the amount of sun they get. And this is actually the first sunny day we've been getting in a long time. So I'm out here early in the morning trying to get this done as soon as I can before it gets too hot in here. Tomatoes are one of our first garden items besides flowers, but the first vegetable type thing we ever tried to grow. And because that was the #1 most important thing to us. And through the years, I learned the best tips and tricks that work for me. And really, when I first started growing them, we didn't do anything special with them other than trying to give them support. We just let them grow. And we got tomatoes like crazy. The one main thing here, though, is you have to do it in a greenhouse if you want to get any kind of tomato harvest. It's not that you can't grow them outside at all, but there's only certain varieties that will do well outside. But even those that might grow will often, the tomatoes will often split because of our very wet, rainy climate. And so one thing that is commonly recommended is to break off all of your suckers and all of your leaves, which I do break off leaves. You might not be able to tell by what you're seeing so far because I do leave a lot of leaves. And I do break off some of the suckers, but I don't break them all off. Because I get more tomatoes when I leave at least some of this stuff and don't make it quite as thin as some people do, especially those who live in very sunny areas where they get plenty of light. And there were a couple of years I tried doing all that, taking all the suckers off, stripping off all of the leaves from here down, from just leaving the very top. And what I found is my tomato plants don't do near as well. Now, the claim is on the suckers is that you might get more tomatoes, but they'll be smaller. But I didn't find that when I stripped off all the suckers that, yes, I got less tomatoes, and they weren't any bigger than the ones that when I left the suckers in place. At least for me, I found that it's good. I try to leave usually 2 on each plant. Sometimes I'll end up with more because there's some that will just start growing and I won't catch them right away. And I really hate cutting them off once they start developing flowers and tomatoes. And then the leaves, I do keep some stripped off. I got a bunch here that I need to strip off, and so I'll put a clip right here. And typically what I do is I try to break them off and not use scissors. It's really not the best idea to use scissors to cut all your leaves, but I do find with some of the suckers, it is, if you let them get too big, it's better to use scissors than to try to break them off. If you catch them when they're small enough, they're usually pretty easy just to break them off with your fingers. That's the best way to do it. But I also wanted to share why I leave a lot of the leaves. Now, obviously, one of the reasons you strip off some of the leaves is so that you have plenty of airflow, because that's important for your tomatoes. And we do keep a fan in here. Right now, I don't have it on, or it would be too noisy. But I do run that, especially on very hot days, because it also gets very humid in here. But the reason I leave a lot of the leaves is because we do live in an area that does not get near as much sun as most places. And you have to understand that the leaves are a very important part. Your plants need the leaves to collect the sunlight. That is what helps feed the plant. Obviously you got your nutrients in the soil that feed the plant, but the sunlight feeds the plant as well. And if you strip off too many leaves, it's not as able to make enough food for itself, especially where this particular greenhouse is located, because it's on the east side of the shop, built up right up next to the shop. It gets less sunlight than a greenhouse would, like our covered area right out here. That's right. It definitely gets full sun, where part of the day this can get pretty well shaded out by the shop right here. But it still does very good for our tomatoes and our cucumbers, which are right here. Let me turn the camera. You can see my cucumbers, which by the time this video publishes, they'll be clear up to the ceiling, and I'll have cucumbers all over the place on them, and I'll be making some cucumber kimchi, which I'll be doing a video on that as well. You'll see strings just multicolors because what I do is just use leftover yarn that I don't have any use for anything else. And Patrick years ago had put these posts with, he just kind of threw them together, and they're old and some of them are starting to rot, but he's got the cross pieces up here, and I simply tie the tomatoes up to that. But I want to show you, there's a couple different ways that I typically tie them, but I'm going to show you right now my favorite way is I even out the yarn. Well, I even out the yarn, and then I take the loop end and I wrap it. I'll try to zoom in on this. I wrap it around just like under, try to get it right under one of the leaves there, a nice strong leaf, and then loop it through. I don't know if you can see that. Loop it through like that and pull it. And the more support you can have if you're using something like this, you know, having it double layered and looping it, it's going to spread the weight of that out more rather than having a single piece of yarn that can cut into the plant. This is going to be a lot safer. And it's going to hang on there good. And then I'll just tie it up to the top along with the rest to give that support. Now this one, this piece right here that I'm tying up is one of the suckers that had come off the plant. So this one actually has quite a few suckers and quite a few leaves. But anyway, you just got to find what's going to work best for you depending on your climate, your area, where your greenhouse is, if they're in a greenhouse. And that's going to have a lot of say on it too. And here I do have to water my tomatoes quite a bit. Some places say only water your tomatoes once every other day or once every few days. But because it can get so hot in here on the hottest days of summer and especially midday, I actually have found one of the things I've learned that's best for both my tomatoes and especially my cucumbers is that in the middle of the day, when it gets super hot, they'll start to wilt. And so if I just come in here and just spray the whole plants down, put the water on the leaves. I was taught for years, you don't water the tomatoes from the top, you only water them from the bottom. Well, I've learned to disagree with that and found that my tomatoes do so much better when I come in and spray the whole plant down. I do try to soak the ground well too, but spray that whole plant down, and especially the cucumbers, when you see them start to wilt, spray them down. And come back in about 5 minutes and you'll notice they'll just spring right back up, because your plants don't collect water just from the soil alone. They get it from the leaves. The leaves collect moisture, especially early in the morning when the pores are open wider. And I did a video on this, is that when the birds sing in the morning, that particular sounds that they make actually cause the word totally escapes me now, but they're like little mouths inside the plant leaves that open up. It's actually the sound, the singing, that causes those to open up like that. And that's early in the morning, where all the nutrients and the dew is sitting on the plant, so that can just pull all that into the leaves. You know, that's one thing a lot of people don't know or tend to forget, is that the leaves not only collect sunlight, they also collect moisture and carry it through the rest of the plant. So it's not just coming from the soil. So especially on your really hot days, and when you're seeing this, it should be some pretty hot days for a lot of people. That is a really good time to water your plants from the top. Especially if you see them just start to wilt, just go ahead and just shoot a little bit of water on them and they'll perk right back up again. And by the way, I do have an old video on this, but I'm going to go ahead and cover it here because I do things just a little bit differently than I did back then, though I'll still include a clip from this old video, is that when I go to start my tomatoes at the end of the season, instead of slicing my tomatoes and saving them in slices now, when I go to save my seeds, I found for me the best way now, and I've done all methods. I've done the fermenting the seeds and then, you know, drying them out. The easiest, simplest way for me now is when I'm cutting a tomato and I like the looks of that particular tomato. It's nice and healthy. I will actually scrape the seeds out and I'll still use the meat of the tomato. Figures, there's always got to be somebody making noise. Okay, she's probably going to be going on for a while, so I hope that sound isn't too bothersome. But anyway, I'll just scrape the seeds out, put those seeds on a paper towel, let them dry naturally. I don't dehydrate them. I just put them on a rack and let them dry. Hey! Stop it! What are you doing back here? Anyway, I think they were just making noise to make noise. But anyway, I just let them air dry. And then I fold up that little piece, that paper towel, mark it, and then put it away. And when I'm ready to start my seeds, I will rip off a piece of that, the pieces that, especially the ones that have the most seeds, stick that in a 4-inch pot, cover it with some soil, and it will just grow in a big cluster. And the only reason I even put them in separate pots is because I have 3 or 4 different varieties I'm growing, and I'll mark that pot. And then as the weather warms up and I'm ready to start getting them out of the living room because they're starting to get too big for the 4-inch pots, I'll take that whole big cluster and stick it in a bigger pot up on the shelf here until I'm ready to start putting them in the ground. And yes, the roots will all intertwine as they're growing in there. It's no big deal. And in fact, as you carefully pull the plants apart, as you'll see in this clip, just do it carefully. But by doing that, what happens is that stimulates the plant so that it will it'll grow better. It's not going to kill it off unless you break all of the roots off, which would mean you'd have to snap the whole plant off. But sometimes even that can be saved by simply sticking it in water and letting roots grow, because any part of the tomato that's in the ground, that's under the soil, will grow roots. Any part, it doesn't matter. So, and we've actually saved a plant like that when it got totally broke off above the soil, and it was a good sized plant like one of these, and so we just took it and we stuck it in some soil and watered it in really good, and it did fine. It made it through. So yeah, that's how I do it. I don't separate my tomatoes out into a whole bunch of tiny little pots. It's really unnecessary unless you're planning on selling those starts and you want them in separate little pots. But to save space for me, I don't do that. It just take up way too much room inside the house when I'm starting them, and way too much room in here in the greenhouse, even when I move them out here, until I'm ready to put them in the ground. And then also, as I'm harvesting the tomatoes, I actually start harvesting them as soon as I see them start to develop color. I don't always wait for the tomatoes to get fully red. And the reason for that is I find that the more I can just keep the tomatoes, picking the tomatoes and bringing them in, the more it's going to help encourage the rest of the tomatoes to grow and to ripen quicker. And I find that works pretty good for me. But again, this is just what works for me in our cool, very, very wet climate. Now, for those of you who are new, we get an average of 120 inches of rainfall every year. We can get as much as 160 inches. Now, if you don't know what your rainfall is in comparison, I highly suggest you look that up. All you have to do is type in your city and state and then put average annual rainfall, and you'll be able to pull that up so you can do a comparison and you can get an idea so that you can say, well, you know, we don't get that much rain, and you can kind of, you know, if you're new to doing all this stuff, you know, it'll help give you an idea what your plants will need. But any place that gets a lot of rainfall, it is best to keep your tomatoes kind of protected from too much rain, because it does cause your tomatoes to split. And then anyway, so yeah, I just bring them in and let them ripen in the window. And then since I don't can the tomatoes anymore, I prefer to dehydrate them, because they work just as good dehydrated as they do canned for all the things I use them for. And they take up a ton less room. I don't have to wait until I have enough to run a canner full. I just start dehydrating them and flake them up. And I have a video just on that alone that I will link to in the description box down below. So anyway, even though I know you're seeing this later in August, so when you start growing things next year, you'll be ready and have this information, especially if you live in an area like ours. But keep in mind, just try different methods, keep experimenting, keep doing what works, and learning as you go what works best for you. Because a lot of people just have this idea that they can, oh, well, I'll start growing stuff when things get bad. Well, no, you need to start practicing now and learning, because just because Danny and Wanda do it this way, or Heidi at Rain Country does it that way, or Zach over at American Homestead does it that way, it doesn't mean those are the best methods for you. So you need to start learning now, because it's going to vary from climate to climate, place to place, on what methods are going to work for you, and also even just your lifestyle, what's going to work best for you as well, and what you plan on doing with a lot of your stuff. You know, are you going to sell your starts? Well, yeah, you need to have them all separated out in smaller pots. If you're not going to sell them, keep it simple. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful, at least for next year, and thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.